Hello and welcome along to the Qatar Goodwood Festival preview here on the Winners' Enclosure. Looking forward to the first 2 days of the meeting down on the Sussex Downs and focusing in on 3 races on each of the days, principally those group contests. Myself and Martin then here to have a look ahead to the action. We'll be back later on in the week to look at the final 3 days as well. One of the big reasons, Mark, that we are looking ahead to this meeting in 2 parts is that the ground is going to be a big factor during the course of the week. It dumped down a load of rain at Goodwood yesterday, so the ground has gone much softer. It may or may not dry out during the course of the week, but the even bigger factor, whatever the ground, is that the draw, particularly over races at 7 furlongs and a mile, has a huge factor on this track.
Yeah, it really does. And as you say, Chris, the ground officially now soft, good to soft in places. They've changed it to after quite a bit of rain, but we know what the weather's been like, and the hot days that we've been having, it could dry out pretty sharpish if they don't get a whole load more rain. And I think there's bits and pieces forecast. You never can be quite sure, whether they get a little bit more, and it's the sort of time of year where you can get the odd thunderstorm as well, potentially, that just throws a load more down than you're expecting. So it's better to look at it in 2 halves. What we do know is the ground's going to be on the easy side of good, certainly for Tuesday's racing. And the draw is always a huge factor, particularly those 7 furlong and mile races. There, it's a massive factor. It's almost not factored in enough, is it? A lot of the time to the betting markets. I think it's year in, year out. It's quite easy to narrow fields and find winners if you just focus in on prominent races from low draws. Really, you're not going to get every winner. You never are going to, whatever you do. But it's certainly a good combination to be looking for.
Certainly is. I think I was doing a piece just the other day for Racing TV, looking at the draw in big fields over 7 furlongs and a mile. And basically, once you've got a double figure draw, you had a couple of hundred more winners in the last, more runners in the last 10 years from stalls 10 and above in double figure fields. And they had half the number of winners as stalls 1, 2, and 3 from a couple of hundred less runners. So that sort of hits home that fact that stalls 1, 2, and 3 in particular are massive when you get to those double figure fields. Much more of a level playing field when we're in the smaller fields, which we're going to start with the UNIBET Vintage Stakes to kick things off over 7 furlongs. But even then, stall 1 has a particularly good record in the smaller fields. And the horse that's in stall 1 is Eldrick Jones for Roger Fell and Danny Tudor. Real talking horse, this fella, and got a high level of form, but he is yet to get his head in front, and this will be softer ground than he's encountered before.
Yeah, and he's been held up the last couple of starts as well. I wonder if Danny might change that, knowing the nature of the track and the fact that he's got stall 1. Maybe he'll look to be more positive with Eldrick Jones. But then you start asking, will he actually get home if he's ridden a bit more positively, trying 7 furlongs for the first time? He's out of a miler. There are some mile plus horses in the damn side of his pedigree. So there's bits and pieces, although he's by a sprinter in Qatar Glory, there's some hope on his breeding that he might stay 7 furlongs. But just I'd have enough reservations myself about that, with the ground on the easy side of good, to look elsewhere, for all that stall 1 advantage is well worth mentioning. The Acropolis, I thought, it's not a race I've got a really strong view on, to be honest. I think it's difficult to sort of be absolutely adamant about one at the front of the market, for all that the likes of Berkshire Shadow and Lucille have obvious chances. I was looking at the market thinking that 7 or 8 to 1 about the Acropolis is possibly a little bit too big. Now, he's a horse that hasn't met expectations so far on a couple of tries in group company, but they've kept him to 6 furlongs in the Coventry and the Railway Stakes. He met a little bit of trouble in the Coventry, and he also was backing up very quickly on each occasion as well. He ran 15 days after his debut when he won at Listowel, but the Coventry was only 9 days after that, and the Railway Stakes was only 11 days after that. So I think the fact that they've given him a month might just have helped the Acropolis to develop quite a lot. Even when he won his maiden at Listowel, he looked ready for 7 furlongs, the way that he saw out his race that day. And his early form in Ireland was on easy ground as well. So you've got no ground concerns. Possibility that the trip will improve him, possibility that the extra time between races will just have helped him to develop and improve him a little bit. So the Acropolis just looks a little bit big for me. I think Ryan Moore will be positive on him from stall 4, so he should get that sort of ride that I think on the round course at Goodwood is the ideal sort of ride. So it's a shame there's not an extra one in there for each way purposes, which is why I'm sort of suggesting a fairly cautious approach really to the 225, the vintage stakes. But small stakes, the Acropolis probably win only for me.
Yeah, and he may not have been ideally drawn, to be fair, in the Coventry. I know Eldrick Jones, obviously from stall 2, right out in the centre of the track, was the big eye catcher, but you've found some less obvious excuses, but perfectly valid ones potentially for the Acropolis. So I can certainly see him. I'm going to stick with the horse that won the Coventry, though. I think that is the best bit of form, really, that we've got in the book for Berkshire Shadow. I thought that he just looked like a horse that would improve when he went up in trip, really, in the manner that he won the Coventry. He gets that step up here. It's a different sort of track. It's different ground, and you would want him to break a little bit better. So there were a few little niggles there, but I ultimately think that this is a horse that is improving, and he's going to improve again for a step up to a 7th furlong. So he'd be top of the list for me. LaSalle, I like the way that he's progressing, but I don't like that his form dipped the one time that he had a go on soft ground at Pontefract. If you take that run away, he's improved with every single start. And yes, it's limited evidence, but it's some evidence that he might not be a soft ground horse. So all things considered, I'll go Berkshire Shadow. He's at the top of the market, but he's also got a Sheen Murphy aboard who is riding out of his skin at the minute. So I think that is another positive, and the Yards horses are in good form. So it's Berkshire Shadow for me in the vintage, and you've gone for the Acropolis. That is the 225. We'll move on to the 3 o'clock. This is the Lennox Stakes. We've got a Group 2 here, again over 7 furlongs. The draw could be a bigger factor here, Mark, because we're into those double-figure fields with 14 runners after declarations.
Yeah, exactly. And Space Blues, who's going to be favourite for the race, he's drawn out in stall 12. Now, he did win this race quite comfortably from stall 10 of 11, 12 months ago. So he's been there and he's done it at Goodwood before from a wideish draw, but he's even wider this year. I think the race is a little bit more competitive this year with some other improving 3-year-olds in the field. And he comes into the race on the back of one of his lesser performances in Dubai back in March, and without a recent run under his belt. If you look last year, he came back to the UK with a win at Haydock in early June. He then went to France and he was successful over in France, landing the odds in another group race. And then he came to the Lennox. So he was absolutely on point going into the Lennox. He was thriving 12 months ago at the top of his game, and he produced just about a career best performance. This year, it's completely different. He comes into the race cold. As I say, he's got the wider draw, and he's going to have to be at least as good as he was 12 months ago. And I think, on balance, I'm very happy to oppose him, for all that I'm well aware of how talented Space Blues is. I think Charlie Appleby's other horse, Creative Force, is a big runner. Possibly each way, Safe Voyage, who's just been there, done it in this sort of company throughout the years, time and time again. He met a little bit of trouble on his way through when he was 4th behind Space Blues in this race 12 months ago. He's got a good draw in stall 3. I think Jason Hart will be very positive on him. Jason Positive, that'd be a good nickname for him, wouldn't it? Jason Hart, typically positive, I'm sure he'll be on him. And last time out at Chester, he was right back to form. He bolted up in a listed race. It wasn't a deep listed race, but he won well. And it showed us that he's still got a big performance in the locker. So I think Safe Voyage each way. But as I say, I certainly respect the progressive 3-year-old Creative Force and a few others as well.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with Safe Voyage as well is the ground conditions will really suit him, won't they? You saw him finish in the frame, not beaten far in a foray behind One Master last year on really deep ground. So he'll handle the conditions. He's got the draw, and this is the right kind of track and test for him, really. He ran a good race last year around here. Finishing 4th, he's won at Epsom. So these up and down tracks, they do sort of suit him a bit. And I think he's a very solid each way horse. I've got a ground concern as well as a draw concern about the favourite. I know that he won Space Blues on his debut on soft ground, but he would have just outclassed his rivals that day as much as anything. He hasn't really gone on it since. So I'm just going to go with Creative Force, who's progressive and solid. He was obviously only having the one start so far over 7 furlongs, but he was impressive at Royal Ascot on his one start over 7 in the Jersey. Certainly didn't disgrace himself in the July Cup last time out, and I just think that he's a horse that going back up in distance might have a little bit more to offer. He's got a nice enough draw, and the ground isn't going to be a problem for him, having won on a deep surface at Newbury. So I thought he looked very solid, and it's creative force for me. So I'll go him. You've gone to say Voyage. We'll move on to the Goodwood Cup, and the obvious place to start, I suppose, on the day's feature, due off at 3:35, is Stradivarius, simply because he's dominated this race in recent years. He's looking for a fifth straight win in this contest. Can they lower his colours? The big question will be the ground for many people, but it gets brought up all the time. And I know he has been beaten on testing ground a few times, but is it not the case, Mark, that one of his best ever performances on the figures came on soft ground?
It did. It did. I think if it was an absolute mud bath, you would be bothered about it. But yeah, it was soft ground. Timeform called it soft ground when he won the Gold Cup last summer, and he won by 10 lengths. And like you say, it was one of his best ever performances to trounce them that day. And going into it, everyone was concerned about the ground. He handles easy ground. There's no problem with it at all. He's won a long distance cup in 2018 when the ground was on the easy side. He's won that Ascot Gold Cup I referenced by a wide margin. He was mid-division, only beaten 6.5 lengths in the Arc last year on very testing ground over a trip that's obviously short of his best, and he ran perfectly adequately over that 1.5-mile trip in the best middle distance race of the season. So I don't worry too much about it. As I say, I don't think the ground's going to get so desperate that it's going to be massively against Stradivarius. I actually think he's probably going to be a good bet this year. I see he's around the 6-4 mark, which is going to be the biggest price that he's been for years to win one of these races, all because he had his colours lowered to some extent in the Gold Cup at Ascot this year. But he may not have beaten Subjectivist. I don't think he would have beaten Subjectivist, actually, if he'd have got a clear run. Subjectivist was a rampant, dominant winner of the Gold Cup this year, but he's a very progressive, very top-class stayer, Subjectivist. I don't think there was any shame in the fact that he would have finished second to him, and he would have been a clear second, I think, if he'd have got a clear run through. He'd have had the likes of Spanish Mission a couple of lengths at least behind him if he'd have got a clear run. Spanish Mission ended up finishing third, a place ahead of Stradivarius, but I'm certain he would have beaten Spanish Mission if he'd have got a clear run. He's obviously got that outstanding record in this race at the track, 4 years on the spin that he's won it, and I think now might be the time to back Stradivarius. I've probably not said that for at least 4 years, to be honest with you, because I've always been looking to take him on, but I think it's at the point now where on the back of a defeat, he's probably going to be a little bit too, well, I think he is too big in the market, because we still know that he's a very high class stayer, and without Subjectivist in the field, it's not going to take as much winning as maybe it should have done. Yeah,
I think they're all really fair points. I'm going to take him on anyway. I'm going to go for Trushan. I just think Trushan's a horse that is still on the up, and he hasn't had many goes over a staying trip.
Maybe he's another Subjectivist, to be fair. He could be, couldn't he?
He could be on soft ground. I think that's the key, isn't it? I mean, you look at since last year, they stepped him in trip for the first time on Kipco Champions Day for the long distance cup, and he absolutely bolted up. Now, I know that Stradivarius was sort of below form, and he'd had a tough autumn campaign over shorter distances with a run in the Arc and things like that going into it. So you wouldn't judge him on that. But Trushan beat the field decisively that day in a pretty good time. His 2 starts since, he's gone to Chester on his reappearance, which I'm pretty sure was just a prep for the Ascot Gold Cup, really, over a trip that was too short, and he just found it too sharp a test for him. And then because the ground was as quick as it was at Royal Ascot in the Gold Cup, they didn't run him, and instead they tried to defy a mark of 118 in the Northumberland Plate. I mean, that's nigh and impossible, defying 118 in a handicap, and he gave it a fair go, to be fair to the horse. He was unbeaten 3.5 lengths with a decent claim off his back, admittedly, but I just don't think that you've had a chance to see how good he is over a staying trip on soft ground since his win in the long distance cup. And for that reason, given the impression he created and the time he clocked that day, I'm happy enough under these conditions to side with him, because I think it really is his optimum test, and he might have more to offer with that in mind. So it's Trushan for me in the Goodwood Cup, and Stradivarius for Mart in that one. Loads of other good racing during the course of Tuesday down at Goodwood. The handicaps already starting to cut up a little bit with one or two non-runners. Just a quick word, Mark. Mick Appleby, one of our trainers, he's got King of Stars in the 5 furlong handicap, and I'm sure that you've spoken to Mick already this week, having a chat about entries and things. He's a very fast horse who is right at the top of the market. You wouldn't put anyone off backing him. He's got some soft ground form as well.
Yeah, I think the ground would be the only slight little niggle, because it was more in Ireland, wasn't it, that he had soft ground form, and it certainly wasn't comparable to what he's been doing so far in the UK. So that would be a little bit of a worry. But yeah, he's been the owner, Bill Esdale, bought him himself, didn't he? He wanted to buy the horse, identified him, and he's done extremely well since he joined Mick. He's been very progressive. So no, I certainly wouldn't put anybody off anyway. You know, I've not had a good look at the race, but he's quick. I'm sure Goodwood is a track that he would handle and cope with. He had lots of experience of idiosyncratic tracks in Ireland. He's just got loads of raw speed. As I say, the ground would be the only little niggle, I think. If it was genuinely soft, you know, they may have a look and think whether there's some other targets that he could go for instead. But you know, hopefully it dries out a little bit and it's not desperate ground. And if that's the way that it is, then he would have a good chance.
Right, let's fire on quickly to Wednesday. Going to look at 3 group races: the Oak Tree, the MOLECOMB, and the Sussex. We'll start with the Oak Tree, 2:25 on Wednesday. This is for the fillies and mares. It is a Group 3 contest over 7 furlongs. The horse that was second in the race last year, Valeria Messalina, has got a tongue tie on for the first time. The soft ground is maybe an unknown quantity, but she's got a nice draw in stall 3, and I can see her bouncing back to that form that she showed last year. And if she does, she should be right in the mix once again. So I think I'm going to side with her here. Yeah,
no, that's fair enough. I would just be a little bit cautious about her on the ground. But if it's, again, we don't know what it's going to be like realistically just yet, do we, on Wednesday? But I'd say that if it was genuine soft ground, it would be a bit of a concern for her. We've got to harp on about the draw a little bit more here, though, haven't we? Big field, 7 furlongs. This is the track and trip where you know, the draw it does have a massive impact in big fields. There's no two ways about it, whether something may go and overcome stall 13, 14, 15 or whatever on the day. But the balance of probability is that lower numbers are the way to side, really, and focus in. And that's how to narrow the field down. Well, if we look at lower numbers, you've got Valeria Messalina, you've mentioned already. Yeah, as long as the ground's not too soft. Last Empire, Dandala in stalls 2 and 4. They've got some concerns about whether they'll be fully effective over the trip. Star of Emirati wouldn't want the ground too soft. Helvetia in stall 6 is probably not good enough. So right up the inside, stall 1's got that advantage. I think Sacred has got everything in her favour, really. She didn't stay in the 1,000 Guineas. I think William Haggis pretty much knew before the race that she wasn't likely to stay, but they wanted to give her a shot at the Guineas nonetheless. But they've kept her fresh subsequently. She's been off since early May. She won the Nell Gwyn on her comeback in pretty good style on her only start over 7 furlongs when she beat Saffron Beach, who obviously went and franked the form itself in the Guineas. She had the likes of Star of Emirati in behind her in the Nell Gwyn. She was pretty impressive that day. She's a strong traveller. She's got a lot of speed, but clearly the Nell Gwyn performance shows that she stays 7 furlongs. And I think with the 1 box as well in her favour, Sacred would be a fairly strong view for me. I think she's got her optimum conditions and the optimum draw. So, and I also like the fact that she's been freshened up and pretty much saved for this.
Yeah, I can see all the positive. I think the thing that just niggled in my mind was that the way that she's often ridden, maybe from stall 1, she's going to need a little bit of luck. But then, do you think that maybe Tom Marquand will just ride her a little bit handier? He's overcome trouble in this race in the past, actually. Didn't One Master win it last year with a brilliant ride?
I think he's had pretty much this exact same thing at Goodwood a couple of times, where he's been on a horse with a previous run style of being held up. But from an inside draw, Tom knows that that's not what you can't get away with that sort of thing. You've got to ride them. Yes, get a little bit of cover tucked in touch, but you can't be negative from the stalls. So I'm pretty sure that they'll want to take a lead off 1 or 2 and hope for luck up the inside. But they won't have her buried away right at the back of the field, I don't think. But yeah, I do like her chance. It's probably going to be quite messy, isn't it? You expect it to be at Goodwood, I suppose, and
Yeah.
she will need the doors to open for her from the inside. Vadream would be another one I'd give a positive to under Jamie Spencer, but she'll probably be held up, so she too will need luck in running. But Sacred and Vadream were the two obvious ones for me from stalls 1 and 7 that I think had plenty in their favour, and they were reasonably well drawn.
Yeah, as I mentioned very briefly, Valeria Messalina, for me, just touched off in the race by One Master last year. So got that course form. Does have some easy ground form. She was second in an also sharp stakes on ground that had some give in it as a 2-year-old. So hopefully that those conditions won't be a problem. The tongue tie can maybe bring about a little bit of improvement, and she's nicely enough drawn. Moving on to the 3 o'clock. This is the MOLECOMB stakes over 5 furlongs for the 2-year-olds. I thought this was really, really difficult and not a race that I had a strong view on. I'm going to go for Armour, who I thought ran all right at Royal Ascot last time out. He won at Doncaster on his debut. I'd be guessing with the ground because it's been very quick on his 2 starts, but his time figures have been solid, and I think he's probably open to more improvement. I think he's quite a fast horse that will stay further, and with that in mind, he's got pace, but he'll stay further, and therefore the ground blunting, making it a bit more of a stamina test, could suit him. The other factor was that he's drawn in stall 11, and for all that you maybe as a rule don't want to be high, if the ground is soft, then the stands rail can sometimes be an advantage, and maybe being drawn right there would be a help. So I'll go with Armour without a massive amount of confidence.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a bit the same, really. I think obviously the likes of Fairby and Chipotle, they're going to be strong contenders for the race. Chipotle probably wouldn't want it too soft. He's a bit. His only slightly disappointing run was when he was beaten at Sandown in the listed race on pretty soft ground. So he probably wouldn't want it to be soft. Fairby, I don't think would be bothered by that, and he's going to be a worthy favourite. But I still think that the filly Nymphadora has a little bit of unfinished business about her. She was a little bit disappointing finishing mid-div in the Queen Mary, but the draw was a big factor. We had stall 22 beat 20, beat 15 in the Queen Mary. She was drawn in no man's land, really, out in the middle. I think she was in stall 10. That didn't help her. And she's had a little bit of a break since Royal Ascot, and she showed at York that she's a fast and genuine filly when she won the Marygate. So she's going to have to improve on that form, but she's still not had many opportunities. I think she's better than she showed at Ascot, like I say, and she's going to be a biggish price. So Nymphadora, tentative, as I say, nothing wrong with Fairby if you're keen on him. He bolted up in the Dragon Stakes, and the ground was on the easy side of good there as well, so conditions should be right for him. There's just a little bit of a doubt as to whether the track will be quite as suitable for him, and he's not going to be missed in the market.
Move on finally then to the Group 1 feature on the day, the first Group 1 of the week, the Qatar Sussex Stakes over a mile, 3:35 on Wednesday. A couple of big names missing, most notably, of course, Palace Pier, who's the standout miler around at the minute. St Mark's Basilica, clearly, who's been run over a little bit further, but was in this till quite a late stage, isn't in. So they're the sort of big two that are missing. But we've still got a good clash between a couple of 3-year-olds. A filly, daughter of Franklin, Snow Lantern, who arrives on the back of her win in the Falmouth Stakes, and Poetic Flare, who's already been busy this season, having a tremendous campaign as well with a Guineas win at Newmarket, Group 1 success, obviously, at Royal Ascot, a narrow defeat in the Irish Guineas. And for me, he is the best miler around away from Palace Pier. I was looking forward to the pair of them clashing. I was just going to favour Poetic Flare around here, even against Palace Pier. So with that in mind, on ground that he handles, I'm going to have to be with Poetic Flare for Jim Boulder and Kevin Manning.
Pretty hard to get away from him, really, isn't it? Look, he's going to be a shade of odds on. He's got the best form. He's St James's Palace win, I think, was one of the best performances of the season so far. He's obviously proven himself versatile on different types of ground conditions. He won in Group Company on very soft ground last year in Ireland, but Royal Ascot, it was on the quick side of good, and he dominated them. So he's been getting better with his racing. He's got an optimum draw in stall 2, pretty much. Should take a good lead off Order of Australia, I would imagine. So the setup of the race looks ideal for him. You can't really be negative with him, but odds-on favourites aren't for everyone, I suppose. And maybe if you're looking for something at an each-way price, I'd just put Chindit up as a horse that still has a little bit more to offer. I think last I looked, he was a top price 33-1 Chindit for Richard Hannon and Pat Dobbs. The last twice he's finished behind Poetic Flare in both the 2000 Guineas and the St James's Palace, but in the Guineas he was drawn right away from it, had to make his moves on the near side, and he actually shaped pretty well to be beaten 4 lengths into 5th. And in the St James's Palace, he was still travelling pretty well when he didn't get the clearest of runs at one point up the home straight. He wouldn't have won anyway, but he might have been placed if he'd have got a clear run through. And I just feel like there's still a little bit more to come if circumstances allow him to show it, Chindit. So a very big price. I wouldn't be surprised to see him hit the frame. But yeah, Poetic Flare, strong and worthy favourite from a nice draw in stall 2.
So let's look ahead to all of the group action on the first 2 days of the Qatar Goodwood Festival. Hopefully you'll join us here on the winners' enclosure later on in the week for a look ahead to the final 3 days of the meeting down on the Sussex Downs. Things to take out for it in summary, really. The ground is going to be quite hard work over the first couple of days, and keep an eye on those draws over 7 furlongs and a mile. You want to be in the lower numbers. There might be 1 or 2 clues to pick up from the first couple of days as we go through towards the back end of the week as well. But enjoy the action, bet responsibly, and hopefully you back a few winners along the way on the first couple of days. Thanks, Mark. Speak to you again soon.